While construction workers were busy digging at a residential property in Honolulu, Hawaii, they discovered the remains of an individual who lost his life sometime after 1982. The identity of the man was unknown. A composite based on the man's skull was developed by a graphic artist and released to the public in hopes that it would generate new leads in the case. Years later, with the help from Othram scientists, a successful DNA profile was built for the man, and a follow-up investigation finally led to identifying the remains. On September 28, 2010, at approximately 11 a.m., the remains of an unidentified individual were discovered in the Manoa area of Honolulu. A construction crew was working at a residential property when they discovered the skeletal remains which had been buried. Extensive work by the Joint POWWMIA Accounting Command, JPAC, revealed that the remains were likely that of a white male between the ages of 40 and 57 years. He was between 5 feet 6 inches and 6 feet 2 inches tall. He was wearing a blue short-sleeved shirt and brown Levi Panatella pants. Items recovered from his clothing indicated that he lost his life no earlier than 1982. The investigators concluded that the man sustained a gunshot wound to the head and that his remains were placed in the area under suspicious circumstances. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, hoping to uncover his identity. Despite investigators' attempts to identify the man, the case went cold. In March 2022, the Honolulu Department of the Medical Examiner submitted forensic evidence to Othram in hopes that advanced DNA testing could assist in the identification of the man. Othram scientists were able to successfully develop a DNA extract from the evidence. A comprehensive DNA profile was then built for the man using forensic-grade genome sequencing. Upon completion of the process, the profile was delivered to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team so that genealogy research could be performed. In November 2024, a follow-up investigation was launched using the new leads, leading investigators to identify the man as William Hans Holling Jr. William resided in the state of Washington and had gone through a contentious divorce. He was last seen by his family and friends in January 1985 and was known to travel frequently to Australia via Honolulu. Further investigation also found that the victim's son lived in Washington. The question of what happened to William still remains. Anyone with information about William Hans Holling Jr. is asked to call Crime Stoppers at 808-955-8300. The public may send anonymous web tips to www.honolulucrimestoppers.org or via the P3 Tips app. In May 1985, the charred remains of an unidentified woman were discovered along the side of the Interstate 95 in Westport, Connecticut. The woman was a victim of slaying, and she became known as Fairfield County Jane Doe. The woman remained unknown for nearly 40 years, until she was identified through forensic genealogy. The woman's body was found burning in a pile of tires. Her hands and feet had been removed and were never recovered. An autopsy revealed that the remains were that of a black female, who was likely between the ages of 30 and 40 at the time of her demise. The woman's height was estimated to be 5 feet, and she weighed approximately 110 pounds. The investigators recovered several personal items alongside the woman's body. She wore a pair of Rustler brand blue jeans and a wool wraparound sweater that contained a pack of Salem brand cigarettes in the pocket. Her cause of demise was determined to have been a fatal blow to the head. In July 2012, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite the exhaustive efforts of law enforcement, the case went cold, and the woman's identity remained a mystery for nearly 40 years. In 2022, the Connecticut Office of the Chief Medical Examiner teamed with Othram in hopes that advanced forensic DNA testing could help establish an identity for the woman or a close relative. Forensic evidence was submitted to Othram's laboratory, where the scientists successfully developed a DNA extract and then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used the profile in a genetic genealogy search to develop new investigative leads that were returned to the investigators. A follow-up investigation led investigators to possible relatives of the woman. In November 2024, this investigation led to the identification of Fairfield County Jane Doe, who is now known to be Barbara Heyward Manners. Barbara was born June 9, 1951, and was 33 years old when her life was brutally taken. Finally, after nearly 4 decades, Barbara's remains will be returned to her family for her final internment. If she was alive today, Barbara would have been 73 years old. A local resident walking along the Eel River in Piercy, California, about 170 miles from San Francisco, spotted a pair of shoes sticking out of the sand on the riverbank. As he pulled on the shoes, he made a grisly discovery, revealing human remains. The case remained cold for 12 years, until the man was finally identified. In October 2012, the skeletal remains of an unidentified individual were discovered by a local resident along the Eel River in Piercy. The detectives with the Mendocino County Sheriff's Investigations Bureau responded to the 83,000 block of Highway 271 in Piercy and were provided with a plastic bag containing human foot bones. The photographs taken by the person who reported the remains were also provided to investigators at that time. Forensic anthropologists from California State University in Chico were requested for the excavation of the buried skeletal remains. They retrieved the skeleton of a male individual whose skull was not present. It was determined that the man was between the ages of 25 and 45 years old, standing between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet and 4 inches. It appeared that the remains located within the shallow grave had been there for an extended time, and the partial articles of clothing collected suggested 1980s styles. John Doe's demise was labeled as a slaying given the circumstances around the discovery of his remains. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, and the man was commonly referred to as Skeleton in Sneakers. An investigation was launched, and multiple attempts to identify the remains were made, but was ultimately unsuccessful. In 2024, the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office submitted forensic evidence to Othram to determine if advanced DNA testing could help identify the man. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence, and then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the unknown man. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used this profile to conduct genetic genealogy research, ultimately providing new investigative leads to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted leading the investigators to potential relatives of the man. A reference DNA sample was collected from the potential relatives and compared to the DNA profile of the unknown man. This investigation led to the positive identification of the man, who is now known to be Warren David Hawkins, born in 1965. The investigators learned that Warren had been reported missing by his sister, Paula Hawkins, to the Cowlitz County Sheriff's Office in Washington. In July of 1986, when Warren was 21 years old, his now deceased mother dropped him and another unknown male off at a bus station. Warren was never seen or heard from again. Warren's remains will be returned to his family for his final internment. Warren's case is still an active and ongoing slaying investigation with the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, and anyone with information related to this case is requested to call the Sheriff's Office Dispatch Center at 707-463-4086. In 2018, the remains of an unidentified individual were found in Madison County, Mississippi. The remains were transferred to the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office so that an anthropological analysis could be developed in hopes that the individual could be identified. With the help from genetic genealogy, he was finally identified in 2024. The remains found were determined to be that of a black male who was estimated to be approximately 15 to 24 years of age. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. The case went cold till 2024, when, in an effort to resolve the mystery around the identity of these remains, the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office and Mississippi Bureau of Investigation teamed with Othram in hopes that advanced DNA testing could help to determine who this young man was. This case is part of Othram's Project 525 initiative. In June of 2024, the Mississippi Office of the State Medical Examiner submitted evidence to Othram's laboratory. Othram scientists were able to develop a DNA extract from the evidence so that a DNA profile could be built for the young man using forensic-grade genome sequencing. Once the DNA profile was built, Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team performed genealogical and records research in order to develop new leads in the case. A follow-up investigation was conducted. With the provided information, the investigators were able to identify a potential relative of the young man. The DNA profile of the potential relative was compared to the unknown man's DNA profile using Kin-SNP rapid relationship testing. This investigation led to the identification of the young man as Stephen Steve Shawn Austin, born on September 22, 1979. When he was 17 years old, Steve was reported missing from El Paso, Texas in August 1997, where he lived with his mother. Stephen was seen walking to school on August 19th, but he did not arrive. He had recently been in legal trouble and had disappeared the day before his first meeting with his parole officer. One of his cousins reportedly saw him in 1999, 2 years after he disappeared, but this has not been confirmed. While a missing person case was filed by his mother with the El Paso Police Department, Steve was never seen or heard from again. If alive today, Steve would have been 45 years old. In October 1959, the remains of a child were discovered in a culvert in the city of Mequon, Wisconsin. Hundreds of leads were followed, but the investigators were still not able to identify the child. A shocking revelation was made regarding a missing child from Michigan, linking the two cases to each other. The remains of an unidentified individual were discovered in a culvert off of Davis Road in the city of Mequon, Wisconsin. The culvert was north of Bonnewell Road and south of Pioneer Road. The Mequon Police Department conducted the initial investigation, following up on hundreds of leads. The investigators determined that the remains were that of a child, likely between the ages of 6 to 8 years old at the time of their demise. Due to a lack of leads, the case unfortunately went cold. More than 60 years later, in October 2023, in hopes of identifying the boy, the Wisconsin Department of Justice Division of Criminal Investigation, in collaboration with the Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office and the Madison State Crime Lab, met with an anthropologist from University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh regarding these remains. Traditional DNA testing was completed so that a STR profile could be developed and uploaded to CODIS. No matches were found, and the child's identity remained unknown. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons case. Following the CODIS search, a decision to conduct advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy was made. In 2024, forensic evidence belonging to the unknown child was submitted to Othram's laboratory. Othram's scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unidentified child. This profile was transferred to investigators with the Wisconsin Department of Justice Division of Criminal Investigation so that a genealogical search could be performed in hopes that new leads could be developed in the case and the child could be identified. Doing so would end a nearly 70-year mystery. A follow-up investigation was launched, leading to the identification of the child, who is now known to be Chester Alfred Breiney, whose adopted name was Marku Jutila. During the investigation, the investigators became aware of an investigation in Houghton County, Michigan, regarding a possible missing child, Marco Jutila. In 1966, family members of William and Hilda Jutila became worried and suspicious of the whereabouts of their adopted child, Marco. He was never seen again. The Jutila family had relocated from Houghton to Chicago and were not able to articulate the whereabouts of their 6-year-old son. During an interview with the police, the couple admitted to fleeing Houghton for Chicago and disposing of the child's body in a ditch in Mequon before arriving in Chicago. The mother, Hilda Jutila, confessed to physically beating her son till his life slipped away. William and Hilda were arrested by Chicago police and Houghton County investigators on March 28, 1966, and subsequently prosecuted. However, charges against the Jutilas were dismissed due to the absence of corpus delicti and the failure of the prosecution to connect the skeleton of the child found in Mequon with the defendants. Chester Alfred Breiney was born to Josephine Breiney of Houghton, Michigan, on February 26, 1952. Adoption records showed Chester was admitted to the Goodwill Farm Orphanage and was adopted by William and Hilda Jutila on March 24, 1955. The Ozaukee County District Attorney's Office reviewed the results of this investigation and the positive DNA identification of Chester. The abuse of Chester by his adoptive parents, William and Hilda, went undetected, and Chester passed away as a direct result of their torture and abuse. William and Hilda both passed away in 1988. Therefore, there will be no future prosecution in this case. A funeral service for Chester Alfred Breiney was held on Friday, November 15, 2024, at St. John the 23, St. Peter Alcantara Church, located in Port Washington, Wisconsin, under the direction of Arnice Funeral Home. A procession will follow to St. Mary's Cemetery in Port Washington, where Chester will be laid to rest. Chester's funeral and interment was funded by generous donations made by community members. The skeletonized remains of a young woman was found in 1988 in Bensalem, Pennsylvania. There were few clues to go on, and the circumstances of her demise and her identity have remained unclear for over 3 decades. In early 1988, while a couple was walking in the woods near the abandoned Publicker Distillery in Bensalem, they came upon a concrete well. When they looked inside, they found the skeletonized remains of a young woman. The Publicker Distillery had been out of operation for a decade by the time the young woman was found. In 1994, a forensic facial reconstruction sculpture was developed from the remains found. In 2007, traditional forensic STR testing was used to build a DNA profile that was submitted to CODIS or the Combined DNA Index System, but no matches were found. Additional efforts were made to generate leads, including a 2014 CT scan of the skeletal remains, to create an updated 3D forensic facial reconstruction in hopes that someone would recognize the young woman, but no one ever came forward. In 2020, Bensalem PD took a new approach in their investigation. They partnered with Bode Technology to explore getting enough DNA for advanced DNA testing methods that might generate leads to the young woman's identity. They were able to develop a suitable DNA extract from the skeletal remains. Once an extract was developed, they sent the DNA to Othram to build a comprehensive DNA profile. The identity of Publicker Girl was shared with the public as Lisa Todd. She was 17 years old from the Philadelphia area, who vanished in 1985. At the time of her disappearance, she was 6 months pregnant. She was already a mother to a 2-year-old son. Her family is glad she has been identified, but they would like to get answers as to what happened to her. Fortunately, an investigation is underway. As with so many of these cases, restoring the identity of a victim is the first step in being able to investigate her demise and seek justice if a crime was committed. The police said that her brother and sister, Joseph and Linda Todd, still live in Philadelphia. The detectives said that the siblings were stunned when they got the call about this development. Fred Herron, the director of public safety for Bensalem Police, said, The family was so grateful that we were able to give them some closure. Here is a son that was 2 years old when his mother disappeared, and now that young man has closure. The case remains under investigation as the police need the public's help to solve how she lost her life. The authorities still do not know if this was criminal or accidental. The Bensalem Police Department confirmed that Lisa Todd's case is still open. Anyone with information on what may have happened to her is asked to contact Detective John Monahan at 215-633-3668. In January 2022, the remains of an unidentified individual were discovered in Grandview, Missouri. Later, in February 2022, additional remains belonging to the same individual were discovered. Thanks to DNA technology, the remains were identified in 2024. The remains of a woman were found in January 2022 in Missouri, and the next month, additional remains were discovered. The Grandview Police Department launched an investigation to identify the person. It was determined that the remains were that of a white female, estimated to be between 4 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 4 inches tall. No other identifying information could be determined for the woman. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the woman, no matches were found, and the case went cold due to a lack of investigative leads. In hopes that advanced DNA testing could help identify the woman, the Jackson County Medical Examiner's Office submitted forensic evidence to Othram. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence, and then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the unknown woman. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used this profile to conduct genetic genealogy research, ultimately providing new investigative leads to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads, leading investigators to potential relatives of the woman. DNA samples were collected from the potential relatives and compared to the DNA profile of the unknown woman. In November 2024, this investigation led to the positive identification of the woman, who is now known to be Ashley May Willis, who was born in 1987. Ashley went missing and was last seen in 2021. In November 2017, the partial, skeletal remains of an unidentified individual were found in Slidell, Louisiana, but he would only be identified years later. The discovery was made by a hunter in the Big Branch Marsh National Wildlife Refuge on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain, north of New Orleans. Despite the investigators' attempts to identify the man, they were unsuccessful, and the case went cold. The St. Tammany Parish Coroner's Office sent the man's remains to the LSU Forensic Anthropology and Computer Enhancement Services, FACES, laboratory, in hopes that a facial reconstruction could be developed. However, the skull was missing its mandible, and without it, a proper reconstruction of the individual's likeness could not be completed. They were able to determine that the skull belonged to a white male who was at least 25 years old at the time of his demise. Traditional DNA testing was performed, allowing for the development of an STR profile that was entered into CODIS. There was no match to a known individual or close relative of the man. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite investigators' attempts, the man's identity could not be determined, and the case went cold. The St. Tammany Parish Coroner's Office once again teamed with Othram in hopes that advanced DNA testing could help identify the man, whose remains were discovered nearly 7 years prior. In 2024, forensic evidence was submitted to Othram's laboratory. The scientists successfully developed a DNA extract and then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. This profile was used by Othram's forensic genetic genealogy team in a genealogical search, allowing for the development of new leads in the case. These leads were provided to law enforcement, who located a potential relative of the man. During the investigation, the relative confirmed that they had a missing relative in Louisiana. The relative then provided a DNA sample so that a comparison to the John Doe's DNA profile could be made using Othrum's Kin-SNP rapid relationship testing. This investigation led to the identification of the man as Gary A. Maggio of Slidell, Louisiana. Gary is believed to have been 67 years old at the time of his demise. Gary, an avid outdoorsman, was born in 1949 and had not been heard from since 2016. Anyone with information about Gary's last days or his demise is asked to call St. Tammany Parish Coroner's Office Cold Case Investigator Chris Knobloch at 985-781-1150. In March 2023, a human bone was found floating in the water in Farmington, Utah. The man would then only be identified a while later. The skeletal remains of an unidentified individual were discovered along the shore of the Great Salt Lake, west of Farmington. The discovery was made during an invasive plant species control project on the lakebed, when a worker observed what he believed to be a human bone floating in the water. He then located other bones in the area. The investigators from the Davis County Sheriff's Office and the Utah Office of the Medical Examiner arrived at the scene and collected the remains, along with articles of clothing and a personal electronic device. It was determined that the remains were that of a male. Due to fluctuating water levels, multiple searches of the area by DCSO and the OME were conducted over a period. No other identifying characteristics could be determined, so the details were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. A DNA profile suitable for the FBI's Combined DNA Indexing System, CODIS, profile was developed but failed to produce any investigative leads. DCSO then teamed with Othram in hopes of identifying the man using advanced DNA testing and investigative genetic genealogy. In 2024, the forensic evidence was submitted to Othram. At Othram's laboratory, scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used this profile to conduct a genealogy research, ultimately providing new investigative leads to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted by DCSO, leading to interviews with potential relatives of Davis County John Doe. A DNA sample was collected from a close relative and compared to the DNA profile of the unknown man. This investigation led to the positive identification of Davis County John Doe, now known to be Michael Wallace Gusta, born on February 21, 1956. Michael had been missing from a veteran's home in Salt Lake City since September 2018.